I recently hit 1000 LP, making me the highest ranked Enchanter player on the NA ladder. I want to share with you some tips and tricks in detail that helped me get to this level. There are a lot of areas where you can min-max on enchanters that a lot of players don't take advantage of, so let's start with the laning phase. The most common mistake a lot of players make while playing enchanters is being too passive. Even in really terrible matchups, there are areas where you can and should be playing aggressively. It really depends on the matchups, but I'll highlight scenarios where and how you can create advantages. The first advantage as an enchanter starts as early as level 1. By the way, all these tips and tricks are under the assumption that your AD carry and the enemy AD carry is playing standard carries and not anything like Yasuo or mages. Depending on if the enemy support is ranged or melee, the ideal way of laning changes, but in both cases you should always be looking to hit level 2 first. Theoretically, enchanters or any ranged supports are guaranteed level 2 unless they get cheesed. Before we get into matchup specific things, I want to point out that the best way of not getting cheesed is to not leash your jungler. Junglers don't need leashes, by the way. Walk behind your minions to lane away from the bush and to stand in this area. This way, the minions will block any skill shots and the enemy can't walk up from the bush. If you are against a melee support, all you have to do is auto the wave, and if the enemy support tries to hit the wave, you hit them instead. Melee supports are very useless level 1, except for Nautilus, but even the optimal way of playing that matchup is the same. Most players know that you get level 2 after killing the 3 melee minions on the second wave, but you can extend your advantage much longer and earlier if you play the push slowly. Breaking down this example, I'm autoing the wave while positioning in a way where I can punish Leona if she walks up to try and auto. I'm making sure to stand far away from the bush so Leona can't Q me, and I can have time to Q if she E's. I make sure not to use my relic stack on the first wave because I don't want to push the wave too fast. By not using the relic stack, our wave will only move up a bit from the middle. We have a 2 minion lead going into the second wave, and Leona tries to walk up, so we kite her and punish both of them. After this point, I stop autoing the wave because we are guaranteed level 2. A very common mistake I see a lot of players make is that they will continue pushing so they can get level 2, but you already have the advantage at this point. I can effectively zone both of them myself because melee supports are useless level 1. I'm also not afraid of Leona Flash engaging on me because we are very close to level 2, so if she does, Ashe and I will level up and we just auto win. The key idea here is to recognize that you have an advantage even before hitting level 2. Once the third wave comes in, I make sure to ward Tribush to avoid the level 3 gank. Ashe starts to hard shove the wave, which is a mistake because it pushes our wave faster and closer to the enemy tower. Because she pushes the wave, our melee minions and cannon will crash under the enemy tower after this wave and die, leaving us with only caster minions. If Ashe didn't attack the minions, our giant wave would have stopped right before their tower and we would guarantee safely hit level 3. The enemy bot lane would never be able to engage on us because we would have such a giant wave and the EXP discrepancy, but that gap gets closed since the enemy tower thins out the wave. You get level 3 off of 3 melee minions on the 4th wave, so that would be the optimal way of guaranteeing level 3 in a melee versus range support matchup. In solo queue, you probably won't be able to play this sequence to level 3 out a lot because the AD carry is going to mess up the wave like they did here, but the key point is to take advantage of your ability to get prio level 1 in the melee versus range matchup. Recognize that your lead starts even before hitting level 2 and to zone them hard in the early part of laning. After getting your initial lead in lane, the game gets harder to play in the Enchanter vs melee matchup. However, if you do have a stronger 2v2 and you are able to perma push the wave, the lane is easy. This is because it's really hard for the enemy support to do anything since they don't have any bushes to hide in. The lane gets really hard when your wave is pushing into them and the enemy support has sweeper so they can sit in a bush. You have to play it very safe and sit behind minions, otherwise they can hex flash or just walk up and hook you. You really need to focus and think about your positioning when the wave is bouncing away from you because this is the hardest part of the matchup. The best way of playing this scenario is to mirror the enemy support's position so you are always behind minions, or to take bushes if they are standing in lane. It's actually a giant mistake for engaged supports to give up bushes in this matchup because the range supports gets to pressure the enemy instead. If you can take the bushes and the enemy support doesn't contest you, the lane becomes a lot more playable. The enemy has to either blind hook you or respect the space that you have in the bush. Either way, both options relieve a lot of pressure and gives you the advantage instead. If the enemy is smart and they freeze the lane right before their tower, you have to try and break the freeze. Position as far away as you can from the bush the enemy support is sitting in and use the minions walking into lane as cover to break the freeze. This is the part of the matchup where hook champs truly counter range supports. If they have sweeper and hex flash, they can just wait until you walk up and engage on you. You are forced in a hard losing position, but you have to try to break the freeze, otherwise you'll lose too many minions. Keep in mind this is only for when the wave is pushing away from you and that they can threaten a freeze. When the wave is bouncing towards you, it's a lot easier to play. The best way of playing this wave state is to sit in the bushes to create space and harass the enemy if you can. Make sure you are actively contesting bushes and positioning in a way where you are just out of reach of the enemy support. In doing so, you create a lot of space and pressure as opposed to just sitting back and doing nothing. Constantly adjust your position in the bush and mirror how the enemy's support moves. When the wave starts pushing back into you, you can forfeit the bushes and move down to the other one. One quick tip before going into the range matchup, check if the enemy has sweeper level 1. Most higher ELO supports will have it, so if they do, make sure not to ward the bushes and give them your trinket for free. If they don't run sweeper, it makes taking control of the lane a lot easier. In the melee matchup, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll have prio, so use it in the bush closest to the enemy to leverage your lead, harass them harder, and to zone them off faster. Moving on to the range versus range matchup, for the most part, the goal is the same early in that you want to avoid getting cheesed and you should always try to get level 2 first. Theoretically, a lot of 2v2s are going to be pretty even for the race to 2 if both sides are hitting the minions and trading well. The thing is though, if you have really good movement, micro, and spacing, you can actually outplay the opponent to get a lead a lot of the times even in really terrible matchups. I'm not going to talk about how to navigate specific waves like the engage matchups, but expand more on the micro movements. Before we get into some examples showcasing some techniques, the most important one you need to know that will make you win a lot of lanes is the bush vision drop tech. So normally if you're in a bush and you attack a minion or champion, the enemy gets vision of you and the minions will aggro you. To drop vision and aggro, you have to step into another bush where the enemy has no vision. You can actually get around this while still autoing an enemy or minion if you step out of the bush first, attack the enemy, and then walk back in. The tech is a little hard at first, but if you practice this movement of weaving in and out and attacking, you can get a lot of control in lane. I'm going to highlight a lot of micro movements that I do in the next example, starting with this one where I'm playing Janna against Nami. Level 1, and honestly at most points in the laning phase, Nami will always outtrade Janna if they hit each other evenly, so I need to use the bush vision tech to win this lane. When Nami comes to lane, you can see me step out, W, and then walk back so she can't trade at all. At this portion, I'm going to slow down because there's a lot of things happening. I know Nami is probably going to move forward to try to trade back with me, so I start walking back and give up the middle bush. When I walk back into the third bush, I make sure to stand at the edge because if Nami wards to try to look for a trade, I'll be out of range. When my W is coming back up, I go to the edge of the bush to set up for the bush vision tech, W, and then pace in and out looking to get another auto in. You can tell Nami is trying to trade, but it's impossible to do so without vision in the bush. With good spacing, cooldown awareness, and trinket usage, I was able to create a lead in the first wave. One thing that's not talked about very often is smart trinket usage. I think it's always better for supports to use trinkets for the lane rather than the river because you'll have more control of the lane. Suboptimal trinkets can really throw your lane, like in this example. Seraphine solo loses the lane by not autoing the minions and just giving up bush control. She makes it even worse by warding the middle bush with the trinket even though Lucian and I are going to hit level 2 first. By the way, if you ever ward a bush when you know where the enemy is, make sure to trade with them because you can always hit first with the element of surprise. Warding this bush is terrible because Lucian and I are guaranteed first to 2, so we can zone them off the wave and I can sit in the third bush. To contest me, Lucian will have to ward the bush that I'm in, making them use all of their wards for the bushes. Look at how much control we have in lane already because of Seraphine's lack of awareness. She should not have given us level 2 for free, but in the case where you do give up level 2, use your ward on the third bush so that way you give up less control. I went over a lot of techniques that you can use to gain an advantage, but none of them matter if you aren't spacing well. Good spacing will win you lanes even in the most terrible matchups. In this example, I'm playing Janna into Senna, which is probably Janna's worst matchup. I can never win any trade with Senna when she has her Q up, but I still space in a way where I'm just outside of her range so that I can punish her when she oversteps. You can see me incorporate a lot of the techniques we talked about, but the thing I want to highlight is how I mirror Senna's movement and how I always try to attack Senna if she's attacking Jhin. I definitely could have played the spacing a lot better, but you can see that I'm just never sitting back playing super safe. Always try to position in a way where you are right outside of the enemy's range, that way you can punish them accordingly. We hit level 2 first in a very one-sided matchup because we just had better movement. If you can incorporate all the techniques I talked about and have good spacing, you will find yourself winning in a lot of games as an enchanter. Don't sit behind your AD carry all game and hope to scale into the late game. Being proactive will create more winning opportunities. Speaking of being more proactive, make sure you roam when you have the wave state too. I remember hearing someone say that enchanters should never roam, but that's just completely wrong. All supports can roam, it's just that some are better than others. I roam on all champs, even on Sona, when I have a good timer. I'm not going to go into specific times when you should roam, I have a separate video on that, but make sure you are roaming when you have the chance, regardless of matchup. Also, if you see the enemy take a bad roam timer, make sure to try to dive the enemy to punish them. A lot of people think you can't dive enemies as an enchanter, but that is also wrong. Force trades with the enemy and learn to juggle tower aggro so you can punish the enemy support for roaming on a bad wave. I've talked a lot about laning techniques, but let's talk about builds. I firmly believe on almost all enchanters, you should always sit on tier 1 boots and rush your first item. Enchanters have one of the strongest first item spikes in the game, and the sooner you get it, the better. It's actually crazy how one-sided fights are when you have your first enchanter item early. I confidently take any 2v2s the moment I rush my item because I know that it's a guaranteed win. I think the only enchanters I should rush tier 2 boots are Janna and Bard, and so for everyone else, upgrade to tier 2 only after buying your first item. Another thing I want to mention that will help you rush your item item is to not buy control wards in the early game. I pretty much never buy them unless I have perma prio because lanes will bounce back and forth, and as an enchanter it's very hard to defend them. Stop buying control wards because they are expensive and the enemy will have a lot of opportunities to clear them. Only buy them after the laning phase or when you have perma prio where you can defend them. For my final tip, make sure to walk with your team to clear and set up wards if you don't have the tempo of being on the map first or if you don't know where the enemies are. Literally just wait for someone to walk with you because you'll get jumped and die. I'm sure we all know this as Enchanter players, but this is just another reminder not to. That's all my Enchanter tips and tricks that I think are important. It really sucks Enchanters get a bad rep and they tend to be the first to blame when things go bad, but I want to tell all my Enchanter players that you should never feel bad for playing them. I actually think that Enchanters have one of the highest skill ceilings and they have the ability to outplay most situations if you play them perfectly, but players never limit tests to get to that point. To be a great Enchanter, you have to be proactive and space well. It's always better to limit test and die a lot than to stay back and play safe. One last thing, draft doesn't matter that much in solo queue. If I can get to 1000 LP only playing Enchanters, you can climb whatever rank you're in with Enchanters as well. This video was a lot of information, so thank you so much for watching.